We need to resolve ourselves to the fact that we're living in an age of inflation, chronic inflation, and what will probably turn out to be stagflation, a stagnating economy with inflation for many years. And we need to adjust our whole lifestyles accordingly.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for September 16th through September 23rd, 2024, while supplies last. This week, we have a very limited supply of PAMP 1-ounce silver rounds at just $2.75 over spot per ounce. We also have 1-ounce gold rand elephants from the Rand Mint in South Africa for just $59 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're always delighted to have this widely followed returning guest who's been around for a long time. James Rawles is the founder of survivalblog.com, where he is prolifically written over the past several decades and has an extremely wide following. James, thank you for joining us here again on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks for having me on.
You've spoken with us in the past about numerous topics, including physical preparedness, how to have the emergency food, water, protection, assets, networking in your community, strategic relocation, etc. You've talked to us about Second Amendment rights and about loopholes in gun restriction laws that are possible for people to still have privacy and maintain protection as guaranteed by the Constitution, not just for themselves, but for our republic. You've talked to us about sound money, gold, silver. You've talked to us about the platinum anomaly being unusually cheap relative to gold in the past. There are so many things right now going off the rails in our public and financial and medical and social lives that it's difficult to know where to begin. So I thought I'd kind of open it up to maybe your top hits. I was going to say your top 40, but that's too many. Your top hits in terms of things that give you significant concern about areas that were going off the rails, and then some practical advice from your experience, your research, and those that you've networked with about how ordinary people can respond in a way that's prudent and sane in a world gone mad. So again, welcome back to Liberty and Finance, and let us know you can just start anywhere you like, and we'll work from there in terms of areas of the greatest current concern that you have about direction that we're currently trending.
Sure. Well, I guess my greatest concern is still economic. I think that with the gross overspending that our government has embarked on for really the last 100 years, we have a situation where we have a currency unit that is doomed. We have a whole economic milieu that with government regulation, taxation, and inflation is basically starting to make our entire economy become non-viable. Or at least it's already uncompetitive internationally. It's soon to become non-viable. I compare this to the situation in Spain back in the 1500s when they embarked on a whole series of overseas adventures and gross government overspending to the point that it basically destroyed the Spanish currency and the Spanish economy, all the way to the point where it really never recovered the stature that it once had internationally. Before the 1500s, Spain was very competitive internationally, and after the 1500s, they became a third-rate power and saw declining fortunes all around the world in all their colonies ever since. They never truly recovered. So I'm afraid we're in a situation like that here in America. So the economy would be at the very top of my list. followed very closely by the current geopolitical situation and the risk of a third world war. We're seeing that in the Straits of Taiwan. We're seeing that with Ukraine. We're seeing that in the Middle East. Really, lots of different places where World War III could emerge any day, literally any day. All it takes is a triggering event, and we could see ourselves in the midst of a third world war. And unfortunately, we will not have the advantage of time and distance that we did in the Second World War that allowed our nation to ramp up. And sadly, they instituted a draft, and they were able to ramp up massive military production, and were able to fight a multi-front war. I don't think we could do that now. I don't think we'll have that luxury of time, and the luxury of distance that we once enjoyed has been obviated by the advent of long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. So we don't have those advantages. I think that if we get into a third world war, we will very quickly find it is a come-as-you-are war. And if it is not managed properly, we could find ourselves literally losing a third world war and ending up at the mercy of some other world power. So those are my top two. Beyond that, boy, there's a laundry list right now. We're looking at the degradation of our food supply. We're looking at forced vaccinations with these agents that really aren't truly vaccines. They're not truly immunizations. And we were made all sorts of promises several years ago about the COVID vaccine, and none of them came true. We were systematically lied to, and unfortunately, the genetic damage that's been done will probably be feeling for multiple generations. Boy, the list could go on, but let's suffice it to say we live in a very dangerous world, and we have a government that has proven time and time again that it's thoroughly incapable of providing aid in the event of a disaster. The organizations like FEMA really are just mouthpieces that extol virtues of preparedness, but really don't do much in terms of true preparedness, and that truly cannot really resolve or mitigate a major disaster. I like to say that FEMA actually stands for foolishly expecting meaningful aid.
I love your quotes because I often return to one that you introduced to our audience half a decade or more ago, saying that we are living in the age of deception and betrayal, and that we need to prepare accordingly, invest accordingly, and relocate accordingly. That message of living in the age of deception and betrayal has resonated so painfully and so deeply with our guests and our audience that I have to remind us of that, because we have such a good-natured and good-hearted following that we so many of our audience long for being able to trust those who are our representatives, those who are at the helms of power. And yet you're right that almost uncontradicted evidence and history demonstrates that trust is unwarranted and has been so badly abused that it has hurt ordinary people for generations and generations, and done in many cases the exact opposite of what would be for the good of the people, or for the good of public health, or for the good of what, fill in the blank, whatever is supposedly the nominal goal of the power. So let's return. This is a very productive list. Let's return to your first point about. I'll summarize that as the U.S. is flaming out financially as an exhausted empire. Please give us your nutshell observations about that, and then any remedies that you think are still available to people who decide that they know they're not being led down the right path in that regards, and they need to take protective action for the good of their families, their communities, etc.
The economy is pretty precarious right now. We have interest rates, an interest rate policy driven by the Federal Reserve, which is a private banking cartel, that is really kind of detached from reality or objectivity, right? Like the latest 50 basis point cut by the Federal Reserve was obviously politically driven. Perhaps a cut would be more realistic in a year or two, but as long as inflation is persisting, it's absolutely foolish for the Federal Reserve to have cut rates when they did. And I think we will feel some negative effects from that within the next 6 months or so, because they really cut rates too deeply, too soon. Where the inflation situation really has not been resolved. The government official figures on inflation are highly manipulated, and they use all kinds of hedonics and crazy legerdemain with their inflation figures, basically concealing the depth of the inflation situation that still exists. We're seeing at the consumer level, especially for the things that aren't included in the official figures, things like fuel and food, considerable inflation still exists. And I don't think that, given the proclivities of Congress or the White House administrations from either party, that that's going to be resolved anytime soon. So we need to resolve ourselves to the fact that we're living in an age of inflation, chronic inflation, and what will probably turn out to be stagflation, a stagnating economy with inflation for many years. And we need to adjust our whole lifestyles accordingly. And we need to insulate ourselves from the effects of inflation by stocking up on hard goods, investing in tangibles, producing as much of our own food and fuel as we can, and networking locally for things like food. I'm a big believer in farmers markets. I'm a big believer in dealing locally with people. And even though I'm an arch conservative, I have some pretty close relationships with some local liberals who are in food production. And you meet those people at places like farmers markets, and there we can find common ground with liberals. And I think that things have become very divisive politically in this country. And if there's anything that's going to save us politically, it's going to be grassroots level organizing. And it's going to be common ground at places like farmers markets, where we can work together, trade equitably, and protect ourselves from the ravages of inflation.
I had the further fun of asking some vendors at our local farmers market whether they would take silver instead of cash in payment. And I had the interesting response that some of them looked at me like they had no idea, as though I had spoken a foreign language, that they didn't understand what I was talking about. And others, like one guy running a honey booth, who immediately, he came in close, he huddled up close, his eyes were just sparkling, and he was very, very interested. So I don't know if you could give us some, I know you have a website where you've sold antique firearms, and you have it listed both as Federal Reserve note pricing versus silver pricing. But what about this thing of farmers markets and approaching local food producers and other service providers as well, and asking if they would take silver instead of cash?
Yeah, I've been able to do likewise. The level of knowledge and the level of acceptance isn't quite what it was back in, say, the early 1970s when I was growing up. But the majority of folks still recognize that silver is real money. And as inflation increases, that realization is going to become more widespread. And the nuts and bolts level knowledge of how silver is priced, the difference between troy ounces and avoirdupois ounces, and the spot price of silver, and all that sort of thing will become common knowledge very rapidly. We don't live in a vacuum, and everything is right at people's fingertips nowadays on their smartphones. So they can very quickly see what the metallic value of a U.S. circulated 25-cent silver coin minted before 1965 is. They can find that in moments on their smartphone. That was fairly arcane knowledge 10 or 15 years ago. Now it's right at people's fingertips.
Yeah, I definitely remember. And this is sometimes very helpful. You mentioned like U.S. 90% silver coinage. So basically all dimes, quarters, half dollars, and dollar coins minted before 1965 are 90% silver. And rather than getting into a bunch of gymnastics with mathematics and everything, it became, I remember when I would come home from school every day during high school and see the full page ads in the newspaper for advertising, we will buy your silver coins. Send us in your silver coins. We'll buy them. And it was a simple multiplier, 16 times, 18 times, 20 times face value. So even during an interim period where there's confusion and people are ignorant, that single number, that what's the going multiplier that people can use, it can get you through. If you have what they call junk silver, which is what we're talking about at the moment, can get you through very easily navigating. If at the farmer's market, if a dozen eggs in that era is going to cost whatever $5, then all of a sudden, okay, a silver quarter will do just fine for that kind of thing, depending what the multiplier is.
Yeah, the current multiplier is around 22.5 times face value. But there's one other really important number that people should keep tucked away in the back of their minds for maybe a situation where they don't have a smartphone available, or maybe for a situation where smartphones are not working, and that's the number 715. There's 715 ounces of silver in a $1,000 face value bag of dimes, quarters, or half dollars, minted 1965 or earlier. So yes, the amount of wear on coins does vary, and dimes do pick up more wear than quarters and half dollars because of their surface area per dollar. But generally, if you keep that 715 ounce number, that's 715 troy ounces, with that number, you can create your own multiplier right on the spot, based on the spot value of silver on any given day.
In addition to owning real money, gold or silver, and especially for useful local transactions, we're talking about junk silver or small denominations of silver coins. What other strategies do you recommend for this, preparing for the flaming out financially as in our stage of our exhausted empire, that people should also look at financially? For example, a lot of people on our viewers are either late career stage or retirement age, and they have significant plans for the rest of their lives to live off of their 401k or their certificate of deposit or their bonds, that sort of thing, bond portfolio, or their social security income. Your thoughts for people to weigh and to consider who are in that stage and who want to have a viable financial future?
Sure. Well, some equities, like shares of particular companies, might do fairly well in an inflationary period because those share prices will rise accordingly with inflation. But anyone on a fixed income, say on Social Security, on a pension, or anyone who has invested in anything that's dollar denominated could be at great risk if inflation becomes chronic, or certainly if it jumps up higher, even in the short term. You look at countries like Argentina, where people's whole life savings were lost in just a couple of years, where if they tucked it all away in a bank thinking they were safe, only to see it wiped out by the ravages of inflation.
Yeah, there's two parts to that risk. If you could touch on both of them. One is the banking risk itself. The other is the simple currency value destruction. Even if they had pulled out all their deposits in the bank and held them as filled their mattresses with cash, that same destruction of purchasing power would have happened. Can you clarify both of those?
Yeah, sure. Well, in fact, I think you just did. But essentially, there's a risk for the currency unit itself. And that's the greatest risk, I believe. And if you simply hold on to cash, you'll see it melt away under the heat of inflation. In fact, you mentioned Latin America. In Latin America, they refer to inflation as la inferno, which means the fire. And it basically burns up the buying power of your currency over time. And the higher the rate of inflation, the faster that happens. Here in America, we've had kind of the illusion of a sound currency because we've had since 1913 the Federal Reserve System that has very gradually inflated the currency. But that decline of the purchasing power of the dollar has been so gradual that most people haven't recognized that it's happened. But we've really lost 98% of the purchasing power of the US dollar since 1913.
I wanted to inject a little reminder for people. There's a movie. People have heard of the story, The House of Seven Gables. There's on Turner Classic Movies. There's that movie is out there. And the lead character, Hepzibah Pynchon, opens up a scent shop in her home. And I thought that meant a perfume store. But no, it's not a scent shop in that regards. It's a scent shop like 1 cent is a penny. And people nowadays, nobody would talk about a cent shop because it would be meaningless. But when I was a kid, my mom would talk about, and you know, the song, bought my first 6-string at the 5 and dime. Well, there aren't 5 and dimes anymore. My mom used to call Woolworth's a dime store. Dime store was a term. Then we have dollar stores. Now there's a store called Five Below, which is everything's $5 or less. So people can realize that now we have $5 stores where we used to have penny cent shops.
Right. The Dollar General store just recently became a $1.25 store in effect because all their dollar prices had to go away. May have been the other one. It may have been the other major chain. But inflation is insidious, and it's really, when you come right down to it, a hidden form of taxation. It's another revenue stream for the government. They're paying off their obligations in depreciated dollars. And we have obviously a government with chronic overspending and a Congress with no fiscal control whatsoever. And we need to plan accordingly that they're going to continue to chronically overspend. We need to, again, protect ourselves from the ravages of inflation.
And for people who are in certificates of deposit or have major deposits in the bank as checking and savings accounts, et cetera, and are dependent on, you mentioned things that are denominated in dollars. You said get out and get real assets.
Yes. I'm a big believer in tangibles, not just gold and silver, but practical things like tools and, practical items that will hold their value. Things like canning lids or guns, ammunition. And by that, I mean common caliber ammunition. You don't want to buy oddball ammunition that you can't trade. You want the most common calibers that people are going to want to barter with. By putting the majority of your money in land or precious metals or other barterable tangibles, you are going to be in a position where even if inflation goes ballistic, you're still going to have some protection. You're still going to retain the buying power of your savings. But if you leave it in dollars or dollar-denominated assets, you're probably going to end up losing just about everything.
What about real assets? I mean, real estate, like productive farmland or ranch land or housing or whatever. Traditionally, that's been considered a go-to store of value. I know it's not portable, so it's not like it doesn't meet the qualifications for money because portability is one of those. But what are your thoughts at this time, given the market conditions that we're in?
I think productive farmland or timberland are both excellent investments at this point. There's some places like in the Midwest where farmland may have been maybe slightly overvalued, and where we're going to see some declines. But overall, I think that at least in relation to the decline of the U.S. dollar, we're going to continue to see land hold its value, if not gain in value. And The other advantage of productive farmland is you can help feed your family off that land, whether you're working it yourself or whether you have tenant farmers. It's still productive farmland. It's producing crops, and there I would recommend trying to find land in an area where you have more than just a monoculture crop. You want to have mixed crops, what they refer to as truck farming crops. That's the most productive land and your best hedge where it's going to be feeding your family.
Just as an inspiring way to look at this, folks, if you haven't seen the movie The Biggest Little Farm, I suggest you take it in. It's very easy to find it anywhere that it was put out about 10 years ago, but it's very well produced and very encouraging as far as what you can do rather than just throwing up your hands and feeling like you can't do anything. James, the other thing you mentioned was World War III risks all over the world. Some people do just throw up their hands at this and go, this is so much bigger than me. If this happens, it's all over anyway. Your thoughts for how credible you feel that these risks are at this time, and any prudent actions that you recommend people take in the face of those risks?
Well, the risks are substantial. And there's a lot of things that people can do that are very simple and very inexpensive. For example, the U.S. State Department just instituted online renewals of passports for the first time. Everyone should keep their passports updated for every member of their family. It's inexpensive, but it's something that you can't do in the midst of a crisis because the lead time is so long. Get it done now. Keep those passports updated. So that's first and foremost. Beyond that, I do believe that people should do their best to stock up, anticipating massive shortages in the event of a world war. And of course, the great unspoken is nuclear war. And people should at least, for anyone ages 50 or less, should keep potassium iodide or potassium iodate on hand. That's Ki or KiO3. To prevent thyroid damage in the event of a nuclear attack. And if you can afford it, and if your architecture of your home will support it, if you don't live in an area with a high water table, go ahead and construct a fallout shelter. If you already have a basement, you can convert it into a fallout shelter. That's something I describe in my blog. That's survivalblog.com. Be ready for nuclear war, folks. It could happen. It will probably be fast and furious. It'll be short duration. I don't believe there'll be a full-scale exchange. But if you happen to be downwind of a military nuclear target, which is top of the target structure, then you're at substantial risk. And of course, if you live in the suburbs or hopefully beyond the suburbs, you'll hopefully be beyond the blast radius for the immediate effects of nuclear weapons and only be in a fallout zone. So if you can relocate, that's yet another reason to relocate to a lightly populated food producing area, because you'll be at less risk of nuclear blast and secondarily nuclear fallout, but that's still a risk for tremendous distances.
Another concern that rises in any discussion of nuclear exchange is the potential for an EMP or a ruining of basically electrical grid and electronic items and therefore communications and internet and so on. Your thoughts for people? I mean, a lot of what you've described is simplifying your life down to the historical proven basics, which would help to reduce the negative impacts of loss of those technologies, including power and communication and so on. But your thoughts specifically around loss of power, loss of communication?
Sure. Just to back up a little bit, if you adjust your lifestyle to 19th century technology, you will not notice the loss of 21st century technology. 19th century technology is appropriate technology. If you read my book, Tools for Survival, I go into that in detail. But it's still a substantial risk to the power grids in particular and to the power transmission, which if they're fried by EMP, may take months or years to come back up. A lot of the big transformers that were used for our grid for distribution are actually bought in China with a 2 or 3 year lead time. These are massive transformers. That's what you see on these huge lowboy trailers. They're enormous and they're very expensive. And if they're gone, they're gone. We won't see the grid come back up for quite some time. So plan on that accordingly.
You also mentioned food supply degradation. There's so much that could be a topic for a full day, but we're going to try to do it in 10 minutes. So your main concerns about food supply degradation?
First would be the depletion of our topsoil. In all of our farming regions, because of irrigated farming in particular, we've seen the nutrient value of topsoils depleted to the point where you need good quality supplements to make up for those losses in the green vegetables and potatoes and whatever you get from your grocery store. They simply aren't what people were buying in the 1930s or the 1940s. The nutritive value is greatly depleted. We also have to worry about the contamination of herbicides, fungicides, pesticides. That is pervasive through the food chain, and it's gradually building up in our systems. And I think it's one of the things that's led to things like the rise in autism and chronic health conditions and COPD, for example, and so many, chronic kidney problems, and seeing, of course, huge problems with people being overweight, something that, was a rich man's problem 100 years ago. Now it's everyone's problem. So those are all things that play into the degradation of our food supply, and the ways that we mitigate that are, one, producing as much food as we can ourselves with our own kitchen gardens, at least do some sprouting and have a little kitchen garden. And if you live in a northern climate, that can be in a greenhouse where you can at least grow sprouts, green leafy vegetables and herbs. And if you know what goes into the soil in those plots, you know what's going into your body. That's of course assuming clear, fresh water. That produce as much food as you can. Buy locally produced foods as much as you can, and above all, avoid processed foods. I can't overemphasize that. You don't want to buy junky foods from fast food restaurants or packaged foods from the stores. Those are usually heavily processed. They'll have all sorts of additives, preservatives, natural flavors, which is a buzzword, for the stuff that you don't want in your foods. So grow as much as you can, buy locally, and look very closely at food labels. If you go through a grocery store just tossing foods into your cart, you are shopping wrong. You should be looking at every label for any food that you have the slightest hint might be processed.
I got another great saying. I love these sayings. Our integrative doc that we use says, you have to ask yourself, was it made from a plant or in a plant?
So yes, do watch very carefully as you shop for foods. And with inflation, people are going to be tempted to buy the least expensive foods. And the bad news is the least expensive foods nowadays are some of the most heavily processed foods, at least in terms of store pricing. It won't be that way at a farmer's market, but in a grocery store, if you eat cheap, you're eating junk. But for us as preppers, if we eat cheap, that means we bought non-processed foods in quantity at a lower per calorie price. If we're buying wheat in 50-pound sacks and we know the source of that wheat, then we're eating healthy and we're eating cheap. But if you just buy cheap foods from a grocery store, you're buying junk and it's poisoning your body.
Yeah, I'll give you another example, and I'd like your suggestion for how to avoid that, is that even storable emergency food with long shelf life is sometimes highly processed and not necessarily non-GMO, et cetera. Any thoughts for us, on our audience, on storable food methods that preserve nutrition and are not going to just put us right back into that highly processed category?
Right. Well, I'm a big believer in buying bulk grains, wheat, rice, beans, honey, that sort of thing. And if you buy in bulk, you're buying cheap, but you have to package it in a way that it's going to have long shelf life, retain its nutritive value, and be protected from pests. So there I recommend primarily packaging in 5-gallon food grade plastic buckets with Mylar liners and with a oxygen absorber packet. Now you can buy those already packaged in that manner from companies like Walton Feed out of Montpelier, Idaho, for example, or Rainy Day Foods. A lot of these companies, in fact, relabel foods that come from places like Walton's. But if you stock up in quantity, and if you're willing to take the time and effort to package it yourself, your per calorie cost is going to be much less. If you don't have that time, say you're a professional or high net worth individual or whatever, you can buy them already packaged from companies like Rainy Day Foods or Walton or whoever, but your cost is going to be a little bit higher. And if you buy it in number 10 cans, which are the big 1-gallon size cans that come in cases of six cans per case, your cost is going to be even higher. But there is the advantage that while a plastic bucket has some air permeability, steel cans have no permeability at all, and they'll have the longest shelf life. As long as you keep that can dry, it doesn't rust through. You could have wheat that would store literally 200 years. So there's always trade-offs in terms of dollars versus sweat. And for someone on a really tight budget, they should be packaging their own food in 5-gallon plastic buckets.
If we could turn to the next major concern that you shared with us, was just you said about forced injections and how we were lied to about the genetic impact of those and damage caused by those. And I guess even underlying that was the whole thing about a bioweapon that the whole world was exposed to potentially. That going forward, people are still coming to grips with the reality of what their personal and family and friends' health effects are. But we've been told to watch out because there may be something even much worse on the horizon, et cetera, et cetera. And anytime there's like the scene from the Truman Show where he's trying to escape this entrapment, this prison that he's in by sailing away, and the director of the whole thing is having him hit by artificial lightning. Hit him again, hit him harder. What is it going to take to get this person to just to relent? So anyway, in the face of that, what do you think the current concern is that you have, and where do we go with this as people wanting to live free and healthy?
Well, my main concern really is that governments are driving all of this. Governments and NGOs, like the World Economic Forum, which is probably the biggest, baddest NGO, they really don't have our best interest in heart. And they really look at, from a grand scale, a broad perspective, they really want depopulation of the planet because it matches their whole philosophy. They would rather see us poisoned, dumbed down, and inoculated to death, where our birth rate falls and overall population falls. That's their goal. Now, in terms of protecting ourselves from that, I would recommend keeping kids out of public schools because that's where they're going to be vaccinated and where they're most likely to be force vaccinated in the next few years. And I would recommend, do as much of your own doctoring as you can, do as much of your own veterinary work as you can on your livestock, and don't trust what is coming down the pipe in coming years, I think we're going to see mRNA vaccines infiltrating the food supply in the very near future. In fact, it may have already started. So again, that's just one more reason to move to the boonies, grow your own food, homeschool your kids, and keep a low profile. That's what's going to keep you out of this. And in terms of transmissibility of biological agents, if it's something that's transmitted by casual contact, that's one more reason to move to the boonies and lock your gate.
Just a recommendation on a book. The Prescription for Nutritional Healing is a very large handbook. It's available in many editions. You can get the latest edition online, or you can get even some past editions are very, very useful. They've got by condition or by issue that you want to strengthen your immune system. You want to deal with, when you talk about doing your own doctoring, it talks about the prevention side and also the treatment side in there. So Prescription for Nutritional Healing, really recommend that one, guys. How about the last one? U.S. government proven ineffective at emergency aid. FEMA equals
foolishly expecting meaningful aid. Yes.
Yeah, and I want to add that I attended a public service talk by a representative from the police force in the Twin Cities when we lived there, and the police officer said, one thing that I want, everything we talk about today is important, but one thing I want you to walk away from is to know that we're not going to be there when you need us. That was his most important public service knowledge. So basically trying to arm us with situational awareness, with having some preparedness plans and communication plans and everything, but don't have your plan be, the cavalry is going to save me. Your thoughts?
Sure. Well, for many years, I've been using an acronym that I think I coined, which is YOYO, which stands for You're on Your Own. And that's the sort of situation that we can expect. At some point, the ability of even corrupt and overbearing governments to continue to function at some point is probably going to falter. But assume that you'll no longer have the reassurance of being able to pick up your phone, dial 911, and have the police there within a half hour. It may be days before they show up sometime in the future. We may be more like a situation in Haiti or Somalia where there really isn't a truly functioning government providing the most basic services, including police protection and fire protection. So you need to be able to fight your own fires at home. You need to be able to defend your home competently. And in the modern context, that means not just a gun and ammunition and lots of magazines. That also means body armor, helmets, and night vision gear. Because that's what your opponents may be fielding. Just your bad guy gangsters in the very near future may show up to your door wearing level 3 body armor and night vision equipment. So you would be at a disadvantage if you didn't at least meet them on an equal footing.
In addition to being able to protect and defend your own home, any other things about not expecting government aid? I guess you talked to us about that, having a storable food supply, having real assets, that sort of thing. Any additional aspects of that, doing your own doctoring you mentioned?
If you can't call 911, hopefully you'll be able to call your neighbors. But the phone systems, including cell phones, may not be working. So you need to have good local communications. And that can be as simple as $30 pairs of Baofeng UV 5R radios. It's an inexpensive walkie-talkie. They're actually made in China, which I generally loathe. But in this case, I make an exception. But buy a lot of them. You want to buy at least half a dozen because they are not weatherproof. And you want to be able to pass them out to your neighbors. And in a long-term scenario, you also might want to have to pass out 5-watt solar panels to keep those charged. But communications will be important because if you can't call 911, hopefully you'll at least be able to call your neighbors to help bail you out if you find yourself surrounded by bad guys.
James, in addition to all of these topics, these are your top 5, but I really think you've got hundreds that you've dealt with over the years. How can people take advantage of the resources that you provide at survivalblog.com?
Sure. The site is available free of charge. There's no super secret members only area. There's the only subscriptions I have are 100% voluntary. The archives of Survival Blog now date back almost 20 years. We started the blog in August of 2005. Take full advantage of those archives. They're freely available. They're fully searchable. And there are now more than 30,000 archived articles, letters, quotes, and columns. That's all available free of charge. And again, it's all fully searchable. And beyond just being able to access that on the web, I recommend that people print out the most important articles for them on how-to things like, how to make a 12-volt DC fuel transfer pump or how to package foods for long-term storage. Print out those articles, put them in a reference binder, and keep that binder where where everyone in your family knows where it is. Because even if you end up a casualty, they'll have that body of knowledge. Again, it's all freely available at survivalblog.com, just the way it sounds.
James Rawles is the founder of survivalblog.com. James, as always, your breadth and depth of knowledge and resources is so generous, and our audience always benefits. I always learn from our discussions together. We're grateful for your presence here with us again on Liberty and Finance. If you have any final thoughts for our audience, I'll give you the floor.
Well, I would just wish that your listeners and viewers would think seriously about their situation and get right with God. And if you feel convicted to prepare for your families, don't go for halfway measures. Stock up heavily, plan, train, prepare, and team up with your neighbors, friends and relatives, so that you'll be ready for what's coming. I want to wish all your viewers and listeners the very best. I'll be praying for them.
Thank you, James, and likewise for you and your family. Take care.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for September 16th through September 23rd, 2024, while supplies last. This week, we have a very limited supply of PAMP 1-ounce silver rounds at just $2.75 over spot per ounce. We also have 1-ounce gold rand elephants from the Rand Mint in South Africa for just $59 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.